I was kneeling on the icy hardwood floor, holding my grandfather's freezing hand, when his eyelids fluttered open just long enough to whisper the words that would change everything they do not know about. Help me get revenge. For a moment I was not a military police investigator. I was just a granddaughter staring at a man who had been abandoned like an unwanted piece of furniture. His breath was faint white in the cold air. The house felt like the inside of a refrigerator. And the note, God, that stupid note was still sitting on the counter like some kind of cruel joke. We went on a cruise. You take care of Grandpa. That is where the truth began for me. Before I tell you what I found in the safe and before I tell you what I did when they finally walked through that door expecting a funeral, tell me in the comments. Would you call the police on your own parents or handle it yourself? I checked Grandpa Arthur's pulse one last time. It was weak but steady. I am Clara and I am 28 years old. As a military police investigator, I have spent the last 6 years hunting down deserters and analyzing crime scenes that people tried desperately to clean up. I know the difference between an accident and a crime scene. And looking at the thermostat set to off in the middle of a blizzard, I knew exactly what I was standing in. Most people would have called 911 immediately. They would have filled the house with sirens and chaos, giving my parents the perfect cover to play the grieving, shocked relatives. But I was not going to give them that performance. I wrapped Arthur in 3 layers of thermal blankets I kept in my trunk for field ops, administered a glucose gel packet, and settled him into the only warm spot in the room. Then I prepared the welcome they deserved. I did not turn the lights on. I sat in the high-backed leather armchair in the corner of the living room, the one my father Richard claimed was his throne. I placed my service weapon on the side table, not to use it but to send a message. Next to it I placed the stack of papers I had pulled from the home server in the basement. I waited in the dark for 3 hours. At 7:15 p.m. the headlights swept across the front window. I heard the car doors slam followed by the crunch of boots on snow. Then came the laughter. It was loud, tan and carefree. God, I miss the island already, my mother Brenda said as the front door swung open. Why is it so freezing in here? Did the old man leave a window open? Probably, Richard replied, dragging a heavy suitcase over the threshold. If he froze the pipes again, I am putting him in a home tomorrow. I don't care what the will says. I let them walk all the way in. I let them drop their bags. I let them reach for the light switch. Don't bother, I said. My voice was low, but in the dead silence of the cold house, it sounded like a gunshot. Brenda screamed and dropped her purse. Richard spun around, squinting into the shadows. Who is there? I leaned forward just enough for the street lamp outside to catch my face. Hello, Dad. Clara. He let out a breath that was half laugh, half annoyance. Jesus, you scared us to death. What are you doing sitting in the dark? Turn the heat on. I can't, I said, standing up slowly. You locked the controls from your phone. Don't be ridiculous, Brenda snapped, pulling her coat tighter. It is a malfunction. The system is old. We told Arthur to call a repairman if... I threw the stack of papers onto the coffee table. They landed with a heavy thud. That is the system log from the smart home server, I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. It shows the heating was disabled manually via the admin app at 4 p.m. on the day you left. It also shows 3 attempts by the manual thermostat to override it, which were blocked by the admin. You didn't forget, Richard. You enforced the cold. The silence that followed was not the silence of confusion. It was the silence of guilt. We were saving energy, Richard stammered, his tan face suddenly looking very pale in the gloom. It is an eco mode setting. We didn't know it would drop this low. You knew it was 10 degrees outside, I countered. You locked a frail 82-year-old man in the unrenovated wing and blocked his ability to warm himself. That isn't energy saving. That is attempted manslaughter. Brenda stepped back toward the door. You are crazy. You have been in the service too long, Clara. You are seeing enemies where there is just family. I see crime scenes, I corrected her. And right now you are trespassing on a crime scene. Get out. Richard straightened up, trying to summon the authority he used to wield over me when I was a child. This is my house. You don't give orders here. I do when I have the evidence that puts you in prison, I said, stepping into his personal space. Get out. Now. For a second I thought I had one. Richard looked at the papers, then at me, and fear flickered in his eyes. He grabbed his suitcase. Brenda was already weeping, reaching for the door handle. It looked like a retreat. It looked like victory. I should have known better. Predators don't run. They just change tactics. Richard didn't run. He didn't beg. Slowly, terrifyingly, the corners of his mouth twitched upward. It wasn't a smile of relief. It was the smile of a chess player who just watched his opponent take the wrong piece. You really thought we came back unprepared? He asked softly. Before I could process the shift in his tone, the room exploded in blue and red. High-intensity strobe lights blasted through the front bay window, painting the walls in a violent, strobing wash of police colors. The wail of sirens didn't build up from a distance. They just cut on right in the driveway. He hadn't called them when he saw me. He had called them 10 minutes ago before they even parked the car. Police. A voice roared from the porch. Open the door. Now. Help. Richard screamed, his voice suddenly cracking into a perfect theatrical panic. He threw himself toward the hallway away from me. She has a gun. She is having an episode. Please, she is going to kill us. The front door didn't open. Clattered. A boot hit the lock and 3 uniformed officers poured into the hallway, service weapons drawn and leveled at my chest. The beam of a tactical light blinded me. Hands. Let me see your hands. My training kicked in, not the fight response but the survival response. I knew exactly what they saw. A soldier sitting in the dark, a weapon on the table, parents screaming in terror. If I moved toward the gun, I was dead. I raised my hands slowly, palms open. I am a federal agent. My ID is in my... I didn't finish the sentence. 2 officers were on me before I could blink. I was slammed chest first into the hardwood floor. The impact knocked the wind out of me. My wrist was wrenched behind my back, the metal of the handcuffs biting into the bone. Secure. Weapon secure. One officer shouted, clearing my gun from the table. Get her out of here. Richard yelled, rushing over to the officers, playing the role of the terrified father to perfection. She broke in. She has been off her meds since she got back from deployment. She is paranoid, dangerous. Check the back room. I wheezed, spitting dust from the carpet. Check on Arthur. They tried to kill him. She is hallucinating, Richard cut in smoothly. He reached into his jacket pocket, not for a weapon but for something far more lethal. He pulled out a folded document with a blue legal cover. Officer, I am Arthur's court-appointed guardian. My daughter has no legal standing here. She is trespassing on my property and threatening my ward. The sergeant, a thick-set man named Miller, grabbed the papers. He scanned them under his flashlight. I saw his shoulders relax. He wasn't looking at a crime scene anymore. He was looking at a domestic dispute with paperwork. Get her up, Miller ordered. They hauled me to my feet. I looked frantically at my mother. Brenda wasn't crying anymore. She was standing by the fireplace, adjusting her coat, smoothing out the wrinkles. And that is when it hit me, the cold, hard realization that was worse than the handcuffs. She wasn't looking at me with hatred. She wasn't looking at me with the manic energy of a villain. She was looking at me with annoyance. I realized then that they didn't hate Grandpa. They didn't hate me. To them we were just red ink on a ledger. We were inefficiencies. They hadn't turned off the heat because they were monsters who enjoyed suffering. They turned it off because heating an unrenovated wing cost $400 a month, and a funeral cost less in the long run. It was the banality of their evil that froze my blood. They had normalized this cruelty. In their heads, killing my grandfather wasn't murder. It was just balancing the budget. And getting me arrested wasn't a betrayal. It was just risk management. Get her out of my sight, Brenda said, her voice flat and bored. She is upsetting the balance. You are making a mistake. I shouted at Miller as they shoved me toward the door. Look at the timestamps. Look at the heat logs. Save it for the judge, soldier, Miller said, tightening his grip on my arm. Richard stepped into my path as they dragged me out. He leaned in close, his voice a whisper only I could hear. You play checkers, Clara. I play the law. By morning he will be dead from natural causes, and you will be in a psych hold for threatening your family with a firearm. We won. He winked. I was shoved out into the biting cold of the winter night, the sirens drowning out my scream. The cold air outside hit me harder than the pavement had. It wasn't just the winter wind. It was the sudden, violent stripping of my reality. Sergeant Miller dragged me down the driveway, his grip bruising my tricep, while my neighbors peeked through their curtains, witnessing the unstable soldier finally snapping. Miller slammed me against the hood of the cruiser. The metal bit into my cheek. 3 years ago I was in a desert sweating through my 3rd layer of gear, wiring $3,000 to my father. He had called me weeping. The boiler died, Clara. Grandpa is freezing. We don't have the cash. I emptied my savings. I ate MREs and skipped shore leave so they could be warm. Stop struggling. Miller barked, wrenching my shoulder. I am not struggling, I spat, my face pressed against the icy car. I am trying to tell you that you are arresting the wrong person. Save it, he said. Richard was on the porch now, holding Brenda, who was sobbing into his chest. He looked like the picture of a devastatingly concerned son. Please, officer. Just make sure she gets help. She is not herself. 2 years ago, I was working double shifts on base, exhausted to the point of hallucinations, because Brenda needed a mental health retreat in Sedona. I can't take care of your grandfather without a break, she had whispered on the phone. I am breaking down, Clara. I sent the money. I paid for the retreat. I paid for the peace of mind that allowed her to lock her own father in a freezing room. The realization crashed into me with more force than the handcuffs. They hadn't just stolen my inheritance. They hadn't just stolen Grandpa's pension. They had stolen me. Every dollar I sent home, every extra shift I worked, every sacrifice I made while deployed, it wasn't keeping the family afloat. It was funding the waiting game. I was the bankroll that allowed them to live comfortably while they waited for Arthur to die. They had monetized my guilt and weaponized my duty. I looked at the house. The smart home system I paid to install. The roof I paid to fix. The heating system I paid to upgrade. The same system they used to try to murder the man who built the house. Miller opened the back door of the cruiser. Watch your head. I looked back at Richard one last time. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his watch. He was calculating how long it would take for hypothermia to finish the job once the police were gone. It wasn't a tragedy. It was a balance sheet. And they had just decided I was a liability they could finally write off. But as Miller shoved me into the back seat, the cage separating me from the world, the tears stopped. The shock evaporated. The soldier came back online. They thought the ledger was closed. They thought because I was in cuffs the transaction was over. But they forgot one thing about accounting. Audits work both ways. I stopped fighting. In the back of a squad car, physical resistance is an admission of guilt. Thrashing, screaming, begging. That is what criminals do. That is what hysterical daughters do. But I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was an investigator, and I realized with sudden icy clarity that I had been fighting the wrong battle. I had been trying to appeal to their humanity. But Sergeant Miller didn't care about humanity. He cared about protocol. He cared about the law. Sergeant Miller, I said. My voice wasn't a scream. It was the flat, low baritone of a briefing officer. It cut through the winter wind like a knife. Miller paused, his hand on the doorframe ready to slam me inside. He looked down at me annoyed. Check the timestamp, I commanded. He frowned. What? The guardianship papers, I said, locking eyes with him. Look at the notary stamp. Richard claims he got emergency custody yesterday because Arthur was declining. But look at the smart home logs on the table. They show Richard logging in from an IP address in the Caribbean at the exact same time. Miller froze. Unless he has a notary on his cruise ship, Sergeant, that document is a forgery, I pressed, leaning forward as much as the cuffs allowed. And if that document is fake, then he isn't a guardian protecting a ward. He is a suspect concealing a crime scene. She is lying. Richard shouted from the porch. His voice was too high, too frantic. She is trained in psychological warfare. Don't listen to a word she says. Miller didn't look at Richard. He looked at the paperwork in his hand. He clicked his flashlight on, illuminating the stamped date. Then he looked back at the house, specifically at the dark, unrenovated wing where I had found Arthur. Sergeant, I said, lowering my voice to a whisper that forced him to lean in. If he is the beloved patriarch and I am the intruder, why is he locked in the servants' wing? I saw the doubt hit Miller like a physical blow. He knew standard of care. He knew what a cared-for elder looked like, and he knew what a hidden problem looked like. Why is the heat off in the main house, Sergeant? I asked. If they just got back, why is the house 40 degrees? Miller straightened up. He looked at his partner, a younger officer standing by the driver's door. Watch her. Hey! Richard yelled as Miller turned and started walking back up the driveway. Where are you going? You need to take her in. She is dangerous. Miller ignored him. He walked right past Richard, ignoring my father's outstretched hand, and pushed the front door open. Sir, you can't go in there. Brenda shrieked, clutching Richard's arm. Arthur is sleeping. The stress could kill him. Then I'll be quiet, Miller said and disappeared inside. Through the cruiser window I watched Richard's mask crack. Grief vanished, replaced by raw panic. The look of a man who realized he'd forgotten to destroy the one thing that could end him. Brenda stared at the house, chewing her lip. They weren't watching me anymore. They were listening. I exhaled. I'd bought a few minutes. Not victory, just a pause. And pauses are where investigations unravel. But I underestimated Brenda. While Richard froze, she moved. Calm, fast, purposeful. She slipped through the kitchen side door, not to check on Grandpa but to erase the scene. Miller returned, face unreadable. Bring her inside. That meant doubt had taken root. I walked back through the broken doorway, ready to show the digital trail Richard couldn't erase. But the room had changed. The table with the smart home logs was empty. My laptop lay shattered. Papers torn to confetti. Brenda knelt on the rug, sobbing. She broke it, she cried. She was screaming about surveillance. She smashed everything. A lie, perfectly staged. Not just destroyed evidence. Manufactured proof of my instability. I didn't touch it, I said evenly. Check the shatter pattern. It was thrown. I was cuffed outside. Miller didn't look at the debris. He looked at me with pity. We found the pills, Clara, he said, holding up Grandpa's expired heart medication. In your jacket pocket. He's barely breathing. He was fine 10 minutes ago. I snapped. I gave him glucose and water. He's comatose, Richard said, stepping forward, devastated on cue. She drugged him. I locked eyes with Miller. Run a talk screen. Now. EMS is coming, he said. We're handling you. The cuffs tightened. Charges followed. They'd reframed me from whistleblower to unstable veteran. As they led me out, Richard leaned close. He'll be dead by morning, he whispered. We'll cremate him before you make bail. You'll be institutionalized. I stopped walking. As I heard something. Not a siren. Not a sob. A cane striking wood. Sergeant Thomas Miller, a voice thundered. Do you still uphold your oath? The room froze. In the hallway stood Judge Arthur Blackwood, upright, steady, draped in his old judicial robes. My son, he said calmly, is a liar. And a felon. Richard screamed about dementia. Arthur ignored him, raised a small remote and pressed a button. The TV flickered on. Video. Audio. Time-stamped. Richard forging documents. Brenda laughing. Plans to turn off the heat and let nature finish the job. Silence crushed the room. Uncuff her, Miller ordered. Arthur stepped forward. I'm pressing charges. Attempted manslaughter. Fraud. Forgery. Richard and Brenda were cuffed. This time for real. Blood is biology, Arthur said coldly. Family is a moral contract. You broke it. They were dragged into the same cold they tried to weaponize. I turned up the heat. Arthur sank into his chair, exhausted but alive. I'm tired, he whispered. But I'm warm. We saved each other, I said. They thought the cold would kill him.